Okay, so here we are in the vast cellars of the Madrone Winery, once again, for the next installment of Conversations with a Winemaker. Tonight is an old friend of mine, he's very old, John Munch. I started with John Munch back in 1992 at the Adelaide Winery, and we've been friends and had many conversations over the years, so tonight we'll see where this leads. Mr. Munch.
Cheers.
Good to see you.
This is
I'd like to
remarkable wine.
I'd like to throw out Tonio Conti. I've been thinking about today as a beginning, which is where you began Pastoral,
It is,
right?
Pretty much so, yeah. Tonio Conti, initially Chaboté, which is French for Puss in Boots, but everybody in this country pronounced it Chat Booty, so we abandoned that name pretty quickly.
But did become the original name of what is now Castora Cellars facility.
Absolutely, yeah. It goes back a ways. Neil Utzon was working, Castora was working at the old Estrella Winery, which is now Meridian. I was doing nothing other than cabinetry at the time, but my brother-in-law, who is a French scoundrel of sorts, was very involved with getting money for French people out of France. In those days, it was really very difficult to do because the government wouldn't allow...
Who better to give it to?
Get to Guy, yes. The government wouldn't allow you to take out... You were going to go out for a 20 months vacation, you could take $300 or something. The French being the French and knowing how to manipulate things, they would get their money to Geneva, where my brother-in-law Guy resided. And he would do things for people investing in the United States. A couple of classics were buying airspace for the Germans above Atlanta. And I never knew you could do this sort of thing. Apparently you can buy the air above existing buildings, and then if anybody wants to build a building taller, they have to pay you for the air.
I can't imagine an English person selling airspace over England to the Germans.
well, Guy being French was selling the American airspace to the Germans, so it was quite okay. Anyway, he ultimately had a group from the Côte de Blanc in Champagne, 5 small producers doing, as they'll call it there, 30 to 50,000, 60,000 bottles. You know, so essentially in the range of 3,000, 8,000 cases, small producers
of champagne.
Of champagne, and they wanted to jump on the bandwagon in California and start a Domaine Chandon, bit on a small basis. So he called me and said, "Can you do some research?" I'd never been into wine other than from the other side of the cork, but I started to look around for them, and next thing I knew, I found myself being their winemaker, establishing a relationship with the old Estrella Winery, where we put up a building, brought in the first big reel press. They used to have one of those continuous mashers there. The first was a Europress 5000, which everybody thought was, no, it was a 12. It was a very large press. And put up a building there on a lease basis, brought in all the champagne equipment. We used their vinification facility to make our base wine and would then go into the champagne or sparkling wine process. And in exchange, part of what we did, we also processed the sparkling wine for them.
I do recall Andre telling me about bottles of champagne flying across your kitchen on some kind of centrifuge that you made.
Well, the first was, I almost killed a poor lady with, I was doing trial disgorging with dry ice in alcohol.
Right.
It was a terrible...
Munch type.
Yeah, well, it was I kept thinking, do I have to give up my alcohol to disgorge a bottle? But there was one bottle I remember that was a little bit oolaged. And I put the neck in, and it had a fracture, and it exploded, and there was shrapnel stuck in the walls all over the place. You know, and neither one of us got hit on it. But yeah, so that was part of it. Then we did a device with a character named Ralph Hurdle, who had Hurdle's rental equipment, more or less where the Kentucky Fried Chicken place is now. And I don't know why we were talking about this one day, but I was convinced that we could make this big giant centrifuge that you put bottles in and have it run hydraulically. So you get this thing up.
I have no trouble imagining this.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So I got it up to speed, and the neat thing was that you have a second one. You have a second one that would develop its speed by breaking the first one, because it was all hydraulic, and we figured diesel, big giant diesel things to run it. But to try out the process, we made this thing that was set in my backyard that had 10-foot long arms, so 20-foot diameter. And it would hold a bottle at the end facing down to force all the sediment to the end. Yes. And we ran it off a big 3-phase motor off of my shop at the time. The first day we started this thing up with 2 bottles, I talked Domaine Chandon somehow into sending bottles that were unriddleable that they had. They sent about a case, so we had this experimental process. And we had the 2 bottles, and it was this long thing with arms and cables holding the end of it. We miscalculated the strength of the centrifugal force on the thing. And it's, what happened was, well, we're hiding behind the Model M Alice Chalmers tractor because we figured that was massive enough to prevent a bottle. But we hear this thing get up to speed and go, you know, like this. The cable stretched, Bing. And it snapped a bottle, and all we could hear was this thing going, just making this sound of glass flying through the air down towards Oak Flats. We have no idea how far it went. After which we added strut rods to it. And it actually worked to a degree, but it didn't seem terribly safe.
And so not that practical.
Not that practical.
2 balls at a time.
Well, that was just the experiment. We figured if we made it bigger, it would work. Yeah.
But Estrella was essentially the foundation, the root of almost everybody that remains in the industry in a way, or who grew from there. Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, John Munch, Bill Sheffer, Neil Zutzen,
Gary Eberly,
Tom Myers, Gary Eberly, of course. I mean, he was the man at the time, right?
Yeah.
All out of Estrella. And then from there, it grew and grew. Wild Horse then became a big part of that. And a lot of those people still in the area. I saw Bill Myers at the Zinn tasting the other night, which was cool. It was good to see him and Neil Zutzen still working together. Yeah. So it's like a 30-year partnership in a way.
It was remarkable. There was really no other game in town, but they would offer, Utzen was working there and as a cellar rat. And
Bill Sheffer must have been like 3, right?
Yeah, so we called him Billy Barrel at the time. But it was a training ground for so many people. It's why so many of us also, when we built our small wineries, ended up with 6-inch hoses because we thought that was a normal size hose.
It's supposed to be.
And now everything is 1/2 inch. Right. I'm not going to do anything beyond that. No, it was quite remarkable, and it gave many of us a chance, Utzen and myself included, the deal with Estrella, because they were largely a vineyard operation that was founded, to my knowledge, on tax losses. You wanted to lose money.
Yeah, it's not that rare, is it?
Well, we can lose money for people real easy, but...
you are actually a specialist at that, I believe.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately. But they had too many grapes, and they had to sell the grapes. Some would go up to Monterey, some to Napa or Sonoma or whatever, and they opened up the winery as really a safety valve. Well, the winery couldn't consume all the grapes. So what they offered me and Niels, or what we asked for and they gave us, was essentially taking wine that existed in barrel, and in those days it was a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Chardonnay, blending from the lots that they had not selected for themselves, and they would bottle it, provide the corks, provide the capsules. I had to provide the labels.
Right.
And it cost me $18 a case for a finished product. And I didn't have to pay until I actually took cases out.
I know. I was telling you
just remarkable.
Bob passed today.
Yeah.
What a great deal.
So
it was. Bob was going to say, "Oh, we should just do that here for you." He didn't know.
Fat chance. No, as a consequence, though, we ended up being able to. I think we were doing 6,000 cases, half Chardonnay, half Cabernet. At that time, Andre was selling that all up and down the coast.
I remember.
But it cost nothing, and of course we were selling it for nothing. But it evolved, and it really gave.
1981, first vintage of Adelaide Cellars, I believe. And still my favorite label design is the early
with the faces.
Yeah. Well, the blue and the silver back then. I liked.
We did one with red, and it looked like an Italian hearse. It was.
Should have stuck with that.
Blood coming down the sides. It's terrible.
There's been lots of when I used to work at Adelaide. There was a lot of. It looks like the Holocaust. It looks like ghosts. It looks strange stuff.
Yeah, we had people that would say that they loved the wine and they would buy it at a wine shop, but they would have the owner of the wine shop wrap it in a plain brown bag because they didn't want to see the faces.
I think that's odd. And I mean, when I was working with you there, in fact, it was probably in the Vineyard Brands times that they made us remove the faces, and then within a year,
within weeks, they
put it back on again.
They started complaining and said, "Why have you taken?" They came to us and said, "We cannot sell it with those faces." And our checking with people, the label was not indifferently received. People either really liked it or despised it, but there was no neutral sense to it. And the people who liked it were in a high percentage, very high, in the high 90s. The label was one of the labels that was being flashed on a wine show in Southern California as an example all the time too. So we did change it out at Vineyard Brands' request, and literally immediately the public was complaining to them of, why have you changed the label? So they were coming back, why have you changed the label? Forgetting that they had forced the issue.
I actually have an original Lidbury who did the original faces of you and me sitting at a cafe in Provence.
Oh my God.
And you looked like you and I looked like the Elephant Man, and for some reason Marcy won't let me frame it and put it on the wall.
Why are you looking like that?
I don't know. I guess he didn't like me, but I have a baseball cap and a really crooked nose. And I keep trying to get it framed. I put it in the to be framed pile, and Marcy keeps putting it under the bed.
I still have the original of the faces in my living room.
I've seen that.
Of his. It's a lovely piece. When are we going to open the whiskey?